Hey guys, it's Chandler, and welcome to The Healing Heroes.
I promise you.
I'm Chandler Stroud, an executive, wife, and busy mom of two, who after years of living with anxiety, health struggles, and an unshakable feeling like I should be happier, made a profound discovery that changed everything. Join me on a journey where unexpected paths lead to healing and more happiness. On this show, we'll explore unconventional ways to unlock more joy in your own life with the help of my very own healers and trusted advisors, the Healing Heroes. Hey everyone, I am so excited to be back here with Lee today. Not just my friend, but also a psychic medium that I worked with way back in the fall when I was looking for some answers around some house challenges I had had. And I highly encourage you guys to go back and listen to my first conversation with Lee, which was deeply both educational, also insightful, but really meaningful, as she touched on a lot about how psychic mediumship can really help people navigate tough times and grief in particular. So it was a great conversation. I can't speak highly enough about it and encourage you to go back and check it out. For today's conversation, though, we're going to be talking about the 4 clairs, something that I really don't know that much about. So I will be learning right alongside you all. Lee is going to share a little bit more about what the 4 main clairs are, help you guys all identify if you might have one or all of these abilities and how they can help enhance your life. So I'm really excited to jump in. And I will say, if you're skeptical at all going into this episode about whether it's possible for you to possess any or all of these possibilities, then I do highly encourage you guys to stick around. I too didn't think that I had the ability to tap into these powers, but as Lee quickly pointed out as we were prepping for this episode, I did have a divine download in the form of what she would call claircognizance as I was thinking about this podcast. And I can talk more about that today. But generally speaking, I did not set out ever in my life to think I want to launch a podcast or I want to do this type of work. It truly came in the form of me waking up very abruptly in the middle of the night and feeling this call to just write down on a piece of paper everything that I was thinking. And 10 pages of content later, I had come up with this entire concept, but it really felt like a stroke of lightning. And as Lee pointed out later, that's a great example of claircognizance. So I'm excited to get more into that and the other clairs she's here to share with us today. Before I do get there, I want to do a quick refresher on Lee's background in case you did miss the first episode. Lee Morgan is a psychic medium offering mediumship and intuitive guidance readings. After careers in advertising and interior design, Lee couldn't shake the pull to fully open up to and understand her intuitive gifts. She also hopes to help normalize the perception of psychic work by sharing her own journey openly through workshops, interviews, and information provided on her website. Lee, it is so great having you here again. Thank you for being with us today.
Hi, Chandler. I'm glad to be here. I love this story.
We are so glad to have you. And I'm so glad you love that story because it never would have occurred to me. That was a moment of claircognizance, but it is so true. It's like that thought was not with me when I went to sleep. It hadn't been percolating. It was like I went to bed, suddenly shot out of bed at 4 a.m. with this energy and this pull of just, I have to get this on paper.
Yeah.
And as soon as I started connecting with the keys on my laptop, it was like 10 pages just flowed from me.
It wrote itself, right?
It did. It really wrote itself. It was like I blacked out while I was writing it. And then all of a sudden it was there and I knew what I had to go do.
There are so many stories of that. If you watch documentaries or read books about artists, sometimes even scientists, they will credit an unknown source with downloading them. I mean, I think even Paul McCartney tells a funny story about downloading a song in like 2 seconds. And he's like, I don't know how I did it. So it really is not as uncommon as you might think to get kind of it's almost like a download. That's the best word for it. But it's you doing it, but it just comes from seemingly nowhere.
Well,
right?
it's so cool. And I'm excited to maybe open up listeners' eyes,
Yeah.
ears, senses to what may be happening in their own lives that they're not even realizing is representative of Claire abilities. So I'm very excited to have you here talking about this today. Before we dive in, just as again, a refresher for people who may not have joined us last time, can you quickly overview what psychic mediumship is and why people typically reach out to you for help?
Yeah. So mediumship, in short, is really talking to people's deceased loved ones. If you think of psychic information on a radio band, mediumship is a channel. It's like 99.7. I mean, I made the number up, but who knows? It's just a specific channel on a radio band, and it's where deceased humans generally hold the mic and talk to people. So I talk to people's deceased loved ones. But in that work, I have come across so many other interesting things about the way we get information, the way it may come to us. And so that's where we get into the clairs. And the clairs are really not used in normal human life, but in psychic communities, it's really normal to talk about clairs. And what it means is, how did you get the information? Just like I would say, I saw it, or I heard it, or I felt it, or I thought it. The clairs indicate how you're getting information from energy, right? So clairvoyant, there are four main ones. There are a lot of them, but there are four main ones that people talk about. Clairvoyance is clear seeing. It would mean you saw something. It would mean you saw something outside of yourself, or you saw something in your mind's eye, externally or internally, that wasn't really have anything to do with your surroundings. So most people who experience this outside themselves experience it spontaneously. Actually, most people experience all of these spontaneously, much like you did. So
That's cool.
There are people who have seen a vision of a deceased loved one in their home, even if only for a second, or seen, I hear this all the time for some reason, woken up at night and seen a loved one standing at the end of their bed. And these are examples of when they see outside of themselves, right? It'll be a form in front of you. And then the actual more common way to see for people in my profession is inside my mind. So it's like images in my mind that don't have anything to do with what I'm currently thinking about. My understanding is they're placed there, the images, much like visual charades by spirit. And we'll get more into these if you want, but I'll go over each one. So clear audience.
No, I would love that.
Is clear hearing. So when you will hear, again, usually spontaneously experienced by others, they'll hear someone's voice calling their name and no one is there, or they'll hear a loved one say something and the loved one's deceased. That's outside yourself, clear hearing. Clairaudience inside your head is a little harder to explain because you don't necessarily hear it in a certain voice. But what I always say is it sounds like when you read silently to yourself. So when you read, like if you're in bed at night reading like I do, and you're reading a sentence, you're hearing the words in your head, hearing with quotes, hearing the words in your head as you read them, but you don't know what word comes next. So if I hear in my mind a short sentence, I'll hear it all at once, like yes, or no way. I'll hear that all at once. But if it's a long explanation, I really hear it a word or two at a time, so I don't know where the sentence is going, which is always very interesting. Claircognizance is clear knowing. This is what you experienced, which does come as like, you could think of it like a computer file. It comes as like a download of information. And it's as if instead of just seeing an image or just hearing a few words, you get an entire story in like a file that then opens when it gets into your brain. And then if you're willing, it comes out in the form of writing, in the form of painting, in the form of anything, songwriting. And clairsentience is clear feeling. This one's interesting. And I actually know a lot of regular people who have experienced this too. You like how I'm calling myself irregular, but people that people would consider regular. It happens sometimes with people who are really close individuals. And these are usually two living individuals when it happens to people who aren't mediums. But you can actually feel someone else's emotions or pain. And so I know people who have felt a random pain or a random emotion only to find out their parent or their child or their best friend is having this experience. So that's another interesting thing that we'll get into is that the deceased and in any spiritual form, like angels, guides, deceased loved ones, deceased pets, they're not the only ones that communicate with energy. Living humans do as well. So all of these things could come from any energy source, right? It doesn't have to be a deceased person. It's kind of that funny thing that happens when you're with good friends and somebody says something you're thinking. You're like, did you read my mind? Has that ever happened to you?
Yes, of course. Yes.
Well, what we're not usually aware of is thoughts are energy. And if we're thinking something enough times or hard enough, then probably someone who's close to us and used to our vibration, because humans really do have vibrations, just like fingerprints, will pick up on it in a way that they don't even know how they're doing it. So the first thing is to say that everyone has probably experienced some clair in their life without knowing it, whether it be with a living individual or a pet or a deceased person or an angel or a guide. So a lot of this is happening. It's just our lack of awareness of it.
How do you think that plays with, as you talk about psychic mediumship being a band on a radio station? And I know there's a lot of different stations you can listen to. Can you speak to a little bit about what those other stations are and how maybe the clairs intersect with those? Or is it through the clairs that a lot of those other stations came to be? I just am curious how they play together.
Yeah, which is a great question because I think a lot of this is misunderstood. The clairs are just a way of perceiving. You can think of it exactly like saying seeing, hearing, tasting, feeling, touching. Okay. So I could go to a zoo and use all of my senses, or I could go to a play and use all of my senses, or I could go to school and use all of my senses. So where I am or what information I'm hearing or seeing or feeling or touching or tasting has nothing to do with where I am. It's just they're all there all the time. So the different stations would be, for instance, there are people who do medical mediumship. And medical mediumship is specifically working with a living individual and helping them figure out what could be amiss in their physical form, what could be making them sick or making them feel poorly. Now, in all honesty, those medical mediums work in different ways, but the one we're going to talk about is the one who actually connects into the living person's energy and finds out information that way. So it's a living person connecting to a living person. Now, that medical medium may get images in their mind. They may hear things in their mind. They may hear things outside of themselves. They might get a physical sensation like their client is getting. Any of the clairs can show up in this medical mediumship. Now, animal communication, that's another one. There are some animal communicators that help living people with their living animals, right? So it's a living being feeling into the energy of another living being. And then some animal communicators help living beings connect with their deceased animals. So that's a living person connecting in with a deceased person. And just like in medical mediumship, all of the clairs could happen here. Like looking at your kid and going, when you went to school today, did you listen or did you watch? Well, probably both.
I would hope. We'll be having that conversation later. Hopefully both.
So the clairs are really just ways of getting information that are fun to know about. But I do always want to say, ultimately, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter how you got the information as long as the information is useful or it improves your life in some way or it helps you interact better with someone in your life. You know, it's kind of a little bit like splitting hairs. So I don't like to make it too important, but it's just good to know about, right? That it even exists.
No, that's truly, I have such a like baseline knowledge at this point. So it's just really helpful to understand kind of how they work together. And I think that, again, the radio and the channel analogy is so helpful. I think it's good to use those just to ground people in what we're talking about.
For sure. And then also I want to add the clairs, like whichever one comes most naturally to someone is just like, you know how these days when you go to the doctor or children are in school, they'll always ask, are you a visual learner? Are you an auditory learner? Spirit is smart. And if it's spirit communicating with you, they're going to know how you learn or how you receive information most effectively. Like I'm super visual, right? So I could talk about something all day, but show me a chart and it's like I understand it immediately. So because of that, they will give me, not because it's the only way they can do it, but they're like, this lady really likes charts. Send her a chart. Or there may be other people that they're like, you know what? They don't like charts. It really just confuses them. Send them some words or send them a feeling. So it's really bespoke, right? It's bespoke to the person. It's bespoke to the situation or the information they're trying to get to you. And then the third thing is some spirits also do have preferences. Like I've spoken to some deceased artists in my time, and they really prefer visuals, but you can imagine why. So like
Yeah.
anybody else's communication, it's made up of a lot of things. It's made up of what works for me, what works for them, and what works for the information they're trying to give me.
Okay.
Right.
That makes sense.
But it has nothing to do with the channel.
Got it.
There's a whole nother channel
That's really
where people
helpful.
talk to angels. This is all, I mean, this is not scientifically proven, obviously, but I think one day it will be. This is all by vibration, right? So if you think of the radio band, the lowest vibration on the left and the highest on the right, it will go up in vibration. So obviously the lowest vibration is living things, living people, living animals. The highest vibration, of course, would be God, right?
That's interesting because I was going to ask that. What's the difference between, the spirit guides, the deceased, and angels?
Angels are like God's assistants. Assistants, kind of a bad word. Right-hand souls. Like they got the big jobs. They got the big jobs. And they don't ever become human. They're constantly in service, right?
Okay.
And guides, the whole point of being a guide is you've navigated well here on earth, or the whole requirement of being a guide, rather. So you have to have been not only been human, but been human and been proficient at it. It's like a river guide.
Yeah.
Are you going to let me guide you down the river, which is probably a bad idea, or somebody who's been down the river 1,000 times?
I don't know. Your clairvoyant abilities might be really helpful on a river voyage.
But it's like any other guide. It's someone who is proficient. Like maybe they've passed a test for all I know, or they've got a certification. But yeah, being human is like they're experts at that.
Very cool. I think that's a helpful distinction is, just thinking about as we talk about how there are so many different ways to communicate. It's helpful to know the difference there. Which of the primary clairs would you say you possess the most yourself, Lee? Is there one that you tap into more when you're working with clients?
They're all available. I also want to say, I think it would be really unusual to have just one. It would be like having only sight, but not hearing and tasting and feeling and smelling. So I really feel like my strongest, and this may be just because I'm partial to it, is claircognizance, which is clear knowing. I'm partial to it because, like I kind of referenced before, in clear seeing and clear healing, you can get a tidbit of information. But in clear knowing, you can get a whole paragraph or an entire story from someone. It's just a much more efficient way of delivering information, which is interesting to me because people who aren't in the psychic world will definitely value clairvoyance the most because they think seeing is believing, right? There's so many even phrases.
We know that saying well.
Yeah, in our culture. So they think if I can see it, then I can trust myself that this weird thing happened. So if I see a deceased person in front of me, then they're really here. And listen, that does happen. But clear knowing is just, in my line of work, it's powerful. And even in your experience, I mean, can you imagine getting that information any other way? It's not like they were going to show you pages and pages of a document or they were going to dictate the whole thing in your ear.
But that's how it felt. It literally felt like someone had been like whispering in my dream the whole night. And then I woke up and was ready to just like transcribe the whole thing on paper.
Yeah.
But it had already been there. I don't know. It was the abruptness of it felt so out of the ordinary.
Oh, I know. When you told me you woke up in the middle of the night or some early AM hour to just suddenly do this, I knew exactly what it was. I mean, I didn't tell you then because it didn't occur to me that you didn't think of it. But also, I want to be clear. I'm not any kind of worldwide authority on where this information comes from. I tend to believe it comes from the spirit world, right? Which would be either your higher self or your guides or your loved ones or an angel or God. I don't know. I can't say exactly where each one comes from. They probably come from different sources. And I believe these two trains of thought will come together one day. There are other sources that actually believe that we are more able to access information in a different brainwave state. And it's called alpha state. It's where you have moderate levels of brain waves at a slower frequency. And this is the place where right before you fall asleep and right after you wake up, this is the brain wave you're in. And
Mm.
what makes me bring this up is Edison practiced this a lot when he was trying to figure out a problem, or I guess figure out a problem is the best way to say it. He notoriously would nap sitting up in an armchair, holding two metal balls in his hands to his side. And he did that because all he wanted to do was get to that in-between state where you're almost asleep. And he knew if he dropped the metal balls, I'm assuming he had a hard floor, they would make a loud noise and wake him back up. And so he just kept trying to get to that in-between space because he felt like that, he just knew, I don't know if he knew why, that's where the information was coming. That's where the solutions were coming. That's where the information was coming. That's where he figured things out. When he woke back up, he'd be like, oh, I know it. Like he'd almost fall asleep and then come out of it and know the answer. And this is
Wow.
actually so fascinating to people that you could Google this. Like it's something like Edison's metal ball naps or something. And Scientific American has
Very
I know,
scientific.
but they did a whole study on it and actually put problems in front of people and then asked them to kind of do this thing and see. And the results were kind of fascinating. The people who had gotten to this in between place figured out the problems faster or at all.
Wow.
Where it comes from is really not important in the scope of our, purpose here. It's just to say, hey, you can access this. You can access this, and we're going to, for short, call it intuition, because that's a more universally understood
Yep.
term, which I'm very happy with. You can access this intuition, and there are ways to go about it. And these are the ways the information will come to you when you're accessing it.
I know we covered in our first episode how you receive information, Lee, but I'm curious, how could the four clairs help people navigate difficult situations? Do you think like one clair is maybe more helpful with certain circumstances than another, or is it really all about the four clairs working together to help people navigate some of these distressing emotions and events that they might be going through?
I mean, kind of both, like kind of no and kind of yes. In general, they're all equally helpful. I will say in some really, really, really specific situations, like if someone is just devastated by grief, seeing a vision outside themselves of their loved one can snap them out enough of it just to move to a different phase of grief. So that would be clairvoyance. And in that case, clairvoyance would maybe be so impactful that they would kind of wake up a little back to life. It's like you or me in our regular lives is one way of getting information better than another. I mean, they're all so, I don't want one without the rest of them, really.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Like I said, there's some one-off situations. And even what I described is kind of rare because someone in that state of grief could also be so upset about seeing their loved one like that their loved one wouldn't do that. So it's pretty much no, I guess, is the answer. They're all good. And like I said, we don't want to get too hung up on how we get the information. Who cares?
Yeah,
as long as we
it's
get
a fair point. It's a fair point.
As long as
It's
we
really
get it.
about getting it. Well, I love that because we do talk a lot about, especially on this show, we talk a lot about reconnecting with your intuition. And I think what's so powerful there is it's not just intuition that tells you like what you should do today and what to say yes or no to. It can be intuition that tells you here's what you're supposed to do with your life. Here's how you're going to find ultimate happiness. Here's how you should be, waking up every day. And like, it really allows you to access so much more information to create this life that you couldn't have even imagined. So I think it's important to call that out because we say intuition and people think, oh, this just is a little tool inside me to help make decisions. And it's so much more than that, right?
It's an inner knowing. I mean, to me, intuition is the same thing as psychic. It's getting information that you can't figure out how you got it. That's why it's so hard to accept, right? This is where I love to talk about Einstein. Einstein had this quote that I will read so I don't get it wrong. The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. So Einstein was basically like, this is where all the good stuff is. and then you use your rational mind to figure out how to do it. And instead, we live in a world, I've grown up in a world where the rational mind is the boss and the intuitive mind is kind of kicked out as that doesn't make any sense.
Yes. And that's why we're telling you, you've got to reconnect with it, everybody.
Yeah.
it's so something that we push down through our whole lives to do exactly what you're saying, which is like the rational mind has been seen as like king, right?
Yeah.
But there is so much power in that intuitive knowing
Yeah.
that we don't exercise enough. And that's what we're here to share. Here are tools to reconnect with that knowing.
Yeah.
And bring it forth so that you can then use your rational mind to be the servant of those bigger ideals and bigger hopes and dreams. And that's truly where the deeper happiness is.
Your story of the podcast is so perfect for this discussion because, first of all, a very rationally driven mind would have felt, which is my understanding of what you did, would have kind of felt and kind of known that it was time for you to transition into something new. But it didn't make any more sense than that, right?
Yeah.
And then through our reading, you got some information on maybe zoning in on what that something, at least the world in which that something new existed, right? But you still were like, I don't really know. Now, super rational mind would have just thrown all that out and said, you know what? I have a job. You don't get to do everything you want to do in life. Why reach for the stars? That's silly. Everything's secure. Why go changing stuff? I can't make any sense of this feeling I'm having, so I'm just going to throw it out. Right.
Yeah.
And so, because what I love about what Einstein said is he acknowledges that both parts of both minds are important, but he's saying one should serve the other. So what you did was allow that. You said, okay, I have this intuitive feeling / knowing. I've got a little more info to zone in on it. And now I'm going to ask my rational mind to try to figure out how to make this knowing real, like, 3D. So you were doing what he said. You were asking your rational mind to be the servant, which it is. Like, okay, now help me figure out how to do this. I'm not going to go nuts and just blow up my whole life. I'm just going to try to figure it out. And then because you were open to it, your intuition / spirit / who knows, your higher self was like, she is looking for solutions. She heard the bell ring. She heard that something new is on the horizon. She's looking for solutions. Go ahead and download that plan to her. And then here we are today.
And then here we are today.
But what if you just said, forget that? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's crazy to think what wouldn't be and where I would be and what I'd be doing. I mean, my life wouldn't look much different than it probably did 6 months ago.
Which is not bad, but you had that kind of gnawing
content.
Feeling of something. There's something I hate to use the word supposed. There's something else was this feeling you had.
Yeah.
There's something else.
No, that's exactly the right way to say it. I felt really called to do something bigger. And, it's so funny. The more I ignored that feeling, like if I tried to just say, okay, that's interesting. And I noticed it, but then didn't push the envelope or take it any further, it would come back in a weird way or in a different way to try and tell me something. It's like, I think Oprah always says your life is always speaking to you first in a whisper, and then it gets louder and it starts throwing stones in the form of physical ailments or whatever else it takes to get you to pay attention. But that's what happened to me, right? Like there was this whisper and then it grew into something bigger. And the more I leaned into it, when I finally made the conscious decision to do what this pull was telling me to go do, things started to unfold that were really unimaginable. Like things I would say are miracles, doors that would open and things and people put in my path that I wasn't expecting, but that made it so much easier for the rational mind to carry out the plan.
Right.
And it was amazing how the road was just paved for me when I started listening more to that higher self, to that intuition.
Well, it always happens. I don't know how to explain it. It always happens.
And it's a good way of feeling like, okay, it was meant to be. You're supposed to be doing this.
Yeah.
It's like the affirmation of, okay, well, there's a reason all these doors are opening and this is becoming so much easier. And my old path felt so full of friction and resistance. And now it's kind of like a sigh of relief. It doesn't make it easier necessarily. It's still hard work, but it's a different type of work.
Well, it's faith and footwork, right? So if you have faith and then you're willing to do the footwork, that's the perfect combination. Being aligned with what's right for us doesn't make it not work. It's just different. It just feels different. It doesn't feel like
it feels
work.
Totally different. Yeah.
you know?
And it's interesting. We talk about sitting in discomfort and doing hard things. The hard things aren't what come once your intuition is speaking to you necessarily. The hard work is getting back in touch with that intuition and making those changes
Yeah.
at the outset.
Yeah. And so I would also say, so like I said, or kind of said earlier, most individuals had a spontaneous psychic experience, right? And they've also had intuitive nudges. This is kind of, to me, just a hallmark of being human. These things happen. So I don't feel like the emphasis needs to be on training someone to have more of those unless they like. I feel like the bigger or the emptier bucket is helping people trust it.
Ooh, yeah.
Right. So it's not,
1000%.
it's not, hey, you're not having these experiences. You need to learn how to have them. It's more, hey, let me help you recognize these experiences because you're already having them. And then have a little faith in them before you just throw them out. I feel like that's where the
Yes, Lee.
emphasis would really help.
1000%. I could not agree more. Yes, I think that's right. Everyone has intuition. Everyone's got this knowing. It's just figuring out how to be more receptive and, to your point, trusting of what you're being told.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the times we talk about getting quiet and sitting in stillness and really trying to take inventory of how you're feeling. But I would love to turn it back to you. What are some ways you think people can get not just more in touch with that intuition, but trust it again?
Well, there are a couple of different things. I mean, like I always say, if you don't have space in your life, you're going to have a hard time getting any message from yourself, right? Because our bodies send us messages too. Our bodies send us messages about wanting attention when they don't feel well. And so many people in our culture don't listen to that. So, everybody's going to be at kind of a different level here of being in their body or having space in their life. And I mentioned this in our first episode, and this is kind of an extension of that. What I had mentioned is just write down things, just maybe start to write them down, whether you have the courage or the ability right now to follow through on your intuitions, maybe just write them down. I mean, intuition's coming to us in everything we're doing, but if you just write them down first, maybe that's super step one. Step two would maybe be pick a really low risk one. So I always say you can sometimes a hack to find out what your intuition is trying to tell you or what you're interested in is, what are you Googling when nobody's paying you? Like, what are you reading about? What are you reading magazine articles about? What are you listening to? What are you watching on TV? What are you Googling? Because that is probably your intuition saying this interests you. Now, it's probably a big thing. We could probably pick a million different ways you could interact with this thing. It can be recreational. It can be professional. But that's like a hack, like a modern day hack to figure out where is a space that's really authentic to me. It's a space you can't stop looking at. I'm saying looking at, but listening to, looking at, reading about, whatever. So that's another step. So maybe pick something in that area to try. So let's pretend like it's recreational. Let's pretend like you've had this chronic pain in your back or your leg and you don't know what to do about it. And it's not severe. It's not like life-threatening or severe, but it's just really messing with your quality of life. And you can't figure out why, but you always notice when you pass a yoga studio or you keep looking up yoga studios or your friends are mentioning yoga studios and you're like, it occurs to you, and yet you don't follow through. You know what? Maybe I'll just take a really easy beginner like yin yoga class. And then you don't do it because you've never done it and you don't know where to go. So this is like a low risk proposition, right? So what if in those kind of a moment you go, you know what? I'm just going to try it. Because 9 times out of 10, you're going to go to that beginner yin yoga class, which, by the way, for those who don't know, is just calm stretching. And you're going to come out and be like, it is the weirdest thing. My back doesn't hurt. So it can be so low risk if you'll just start trying to follow your intuition. So another one is it can be pretty hard for humans to trust information that's coming from some nebulous source. I get it. Or undefined source. Like that's no big deal to me. But most people are like, what? Like, I don't think so. So I always say, if you want to strengthen your belief in your own perceptive abilities, work with another human. Because a human is right there in front of you and you can test the results immediately. Like and like we said before, humans are also giving energetic information and we have energetic receptors. So this is a exercise I give my students in my intro to mediumship class. So it's a spatial exercise. So it's recognizing in space where other individuals are. So have you ever been walking down the street and you just knew somebody was walking behind you? You didn't see him, you didn't hear him. You just kind of feel it. Right?
Yes.
So believe it or not, those sensors are not only on the back of our body. Those sensors are also on the front of our body and on the sides of our body. We weren't made with just sensors on the back. And people who aren't sighted will know this, because people who aren't sighted are experts at this because their sensors have gotten stronger because they use them all the time. Right. So you're going to kind of put yourself in that position of a person who's not sighted. So you get, just an eye mask and some earplugs and sit in the middle of a room and pick a human that you really like or trust or that's fun, whatever. And while you sit there with earplugs and an eye mask in a chair in the middle of the room, you ask the person as you count to 10 to come in the room and stand either north, south, east, or west of you, right?
Okay.
I'd say to start out about 3 feet away, because you can increase the difficulty of this with the distance of the human, right?
Yeah.
And so they'll come in the room and let's say they stood right in front of me. So it's like my north, right? But I have eye mask and I have earplugs and I don't know where they are. And I am trying to practice sensing with my body where they are. Because we all know we can do this because we can feel people behind us. And then do it 10 times and see how many times you get it right. And what's fascinating about that is if you do it, I do this with people all the time, and they realize, wow, I got that right 7 out of 10 times. And then what they'll usually say is the other 3, I knew where you were, but it didn't make sense that you'd be there again. So they're also learning how they're second guessing themselves. Like, I think Lee's in front of me, but she was just in front of me, so I'm not going to guess that. So that's an example of rational overriding intuition, right? So they also get to see where it messes up. And then they'll start to trust themselves like, wow, I can really feel things in my environment. In a way, it's empowering in this really strange way.
Yeah. Very empowering. And I mean, this totally jives with all of the energy talk. I mean, Catherine McLean, we talked all about feeling other people's energy and how you can shift the energy around you. And in many ways, we're all energy healers. And that was a cool episode, plug for that one. But also with Katie, and we talk about manifesting and how that's all energy. So a lot of it is interconnected, but what you're saying makes complete sense. And sidebar, I really want to try that exercise with you.
It's really fun. I mean, how can it be a bad thing to just increase your body's sensory abilities? How can that be bad?
It's not. It's not.
And here's what's fascinating, kind of a step 2 of that exercise. It is do it with 2 different people and don't just figure out where they are, but figure out which person it was. And my proof that you can do this naturally is anybody who has 2 or more children has always had one of those children come into their room in the middle of the night, and without seeing them or hearing them, you will know which child it is. Hasn't that happened to you?
Yeah, but there could be so many giveaways, whether it's I hear the little, my daughter has a heel walk that's really heavy. So I always know she's coming versus my son is silent, but I see the shadow of him holding 9 stuffies as he's, towering over me. So there was other giveaways, but
most moms could most moms
yes,
could just energetically identify which child is which child. So to play into what you were saying about we all have an energetic signature, people who are around people a lot can pick their people apart just energetically. I mean, pick which one is which. And I've done this with people before, and they will have this is also fascinating. They'll have some success with me, say they'll get 6 out of 10, and they'll go home and do it with their spouse and get 10 out of 10, which just goes to show you the more you're around someone's energy, the more you recognize it.
I love that. That's very cool, Lee. Thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome.
I thought the tangible examples you gave of both journaling and seeing what comes from that, or I love your modern day hack of what are you Googling? What do you find you're naturally interested in? Are there other ways people can kind of train themselves to be more receptive to the information they might be receiving through these clairs, or other ways that they might be more open to just strengthening these abilities within themselves?
Like if you really want to try something new in life, it can be anything. One of the most successful ways that you can ensure that you will do it is to have accountability. And
Mm.
accountability usually means sharing with another person who maybe would also like to do the same thing and reporting to each other. This is just a human hack. This is how humans work. This is why
Yeah.
AA works. This is why Weight Watchers works. This is why, so we're hacking into human behavior and just saying, if you really want this enough to get an accountability partner, which is that sounds so 90s, accountability partner.
It is not
Is
90s
it?
because I literally just finished filming
Oh,
with Bonnie, my accountability coach, this morning. And we talked all about the power of accountability in committing to
yeah.
yourself because it's so hard sometimes
Yeah.
to train yourself to be kind and take that first step. But when you tell somebody else or have a cheerleader on the
Yeah.
sidelines, someone to really hold you accountable to those small decisions, it's
It's
amazing what can
insurance.
unfold.
It's
Yeah.
insurance that you're going to do it. And that's not individualistic, that's human behavior. So that's what I would say. I mean, because these other things they're really solo activities, right? This is really your intuition, your life, solo activities. But if you really want insurance, tell somebody and see if they'll do it with you or see if they'll listen to you talk about it once a week.
I think it's right. And I think I think it can be very powerful, guys.
Yeah.
Very powerful.
I don't know why. I feel like, well, I can just say when I grew up, I feel like what was presented as like options of what to do with your life were so limited. It was like 10 things. It was like, you could be a doctor, you could be an accountant, you could be a lawyer, you could be a manager, you go to business school, you could be a scientist. So it's interesting to me that now that I'm a grown up, there's a job for anything you can think of. And there's also just a recreational interest in anything you can think of.
Yeah.
So what I guess the reason I think of that is I have a lot of clients who are trying to follow their intuition, and where they get stuck is when I ask them that question about, well, what do you Google? What do you read about? What are you interested in? Their first answer is always, well, that's not a job. And I'm like, well, who says? And we'll talk about it for 5 minutes and I'll be able to name like 10 jobs in that field. And it's not that they don't have the brain power to think of it. It's that they've been so socially conditioned that that's not a job, if that makes any sense.
It makes total sense. I think you hit the nail on the head with that. I think it's so true. I think we all have been conditioned to expect to live our lives a certain way, and it can be really scary to break free of those norms.
They're so limiting.
Yeah. Yeah, they are.
I mean, sometimes I talk to young people about, what I say young people, people in college or whatever, about their jobs, just in my life, not in my work. And they'll be interested in things, but it just is not in their awareness that there's jobs in those things they're interested in.
Or they create the jobs,
Well,
right?
yeah.
I mean, we could even go back to this example that we started with at the top. I mean, yes, a podcast is not anything totally new or innovative. There's millions of podcasts out there, but I think the thing that really resonated as we were thinking about pulling this together is that nobody's talking about these really unconventional modalities and approaches to reconnecting with that intuition and building your self-worth in the way that we're thinking about doing it. And it came to me through that divine download, looking in my journal of, oh my gosh, look at all these different ways I've been trying to heal myself and get to that better place. And I looked at them and I was like, there's something here. And through just, again, that it wasn't like I saw that and suddenly it came to me. It was like I was aware of it and I thought there might be something here. And then I don't know if it was a couple nights later, a couple weeks later, it's like you go to bed, you wake up and there it was,
Yeah.
planted in my head and then just flowed. So I think that's a very cool thing for people
Yeah.
to be hearing and thinking about, because you might feel stuck in your job or stuck in whatever you're doing at home. If you work inside the home, like maybe there's something else you could be dabbling in or doing with your time that still serves the purpose that you want to serve, whether that's like creating that home for your family and being a part of your kids' lives. Maybe that you're meant to do that and something else that keeps you present, but that also kind of fuels that fire for you.
Yeah. And I find too, people have a misunderstanding of creating something new in your life. and we'll use you as an example again, because we've got it right here. But like most people will define something created in their life when it's a product out for others to see. So in your case, that would be when the podcast is out and people can listen to it. But that's not true. The creation started the minute you were in your old job and thought, there's something else. That's where the creation started. And then continued, and then went to, look at all these notes I have. Look at all these things I've been doing. I got this reading with so-and-so. I had this conversation with my accountability coach. I went to this yoga class and now I feel this way. Like the creation started way back before you had a finished product. And that's the part that's so important that somehow our society is not valuing. Right? Which is where all the intuition is. Really, it's like chock full of it. I mean, there's intuition throughout the other part too, but it's like really heavy in that first part.
Yeah. You're very on point, very on point. And it's so true. It's just a matter of paying attention and trusting those messages when they come. Easier said than done.
Oh, yeah.
But that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to give you the tools to open yourself up and trust those messages when they come. Yeah. So hopefully you'll keep listening so we can continue supporting your journey, however that looks for you, the individual. But that's greatly. I think hopefully you've inspired a lot of listeners today to take some of those messages they might be hearing or knowing or seeing in their own lives to heart and making those changes for themselves in their day-to-day. And I so appreciate you sharing that with everyone. And thank you so much for being here. I've loved our time together again so much. I always learn such a great deal from you, and our conversations are fun, and I really am looking forward to the next one. So thank you for being so honest and transparent with everybody.
Thank you. I just hope everybody tries it because it pays off, right?
Yeah. I always joke, even if this podcast bombs, it's the journey. It's truly like I've already won. I mean, I've learned so much from all 12 of you. I've found new levels of happiness in my own life. I have completely transformed my relationships with my family, my friends. I am so fulfilled.
Isn't that wild?
For the first time in my life. And so it doesn't matter what happens with this podcast, truly. I mean, of course, we want it to reach millions of people and change lives, but like it's already changed mine in such a massive way. And so that exactly is your point. I mean, it really has been about the journey. And thank you for being a part of it, because I wouldn't be here without you.
You're welcome.
Oh, this was great, Lee. Thank you so much for joining again. To those listening, if you found today's discussion helpful, please share it with friends who might also benefit, and don't forget to subscribe. You can also visit healingheroespodcast.com to get resources, meet the heroes, and share your ideas for future episodes. Thanks for listening, everyone. And until next time, remember, be curious, be courageous, and be kind to yourself. You've got this.